Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Happy Halloween. I hope you're having a good one. I hope you've got a lot of scares today. It is Halloween. Some people celebrate it, some people don't. I know that maybe you got a lot of trick-or-treaters. I don't think we're going to have any trick-or-treaters at my place, but I think that a lot of kids did it maybe do they do it over the weekends? I don't even know how, or do they do it actually on Halloween? I think on actually Halloween, right? It just seems like, well, it's a school night, isn't it? But I hope you're having a great Halloween. I hope you're gorging out on candy. I know I have been for the last month, and I'm going to toss it all out after tonight. Anthony Blinken, I want to show you this. He dressed up his kids for Halloween, and they did trick-or-treating at the White House, where they saw good old Joe Biden. And look at what Anthony Blinken actually dressed his children up as. That is his son and his daughter, and his son is Zelensky, and his daughter is the Ukraine flag. Always campaigning, right? Always lobbying, always trying to get more money for that war. That's Anthony Blinken's job as Secretary of State. It really isn't supposed to be, but he certainly takes that part of his job pretty seriously. So there's his kid. I mean, cute kids, but dressed up as Zelensky and the Ukraine flag. Let me know what your kids dressed up as. You can email me the pictures. I'm not going to post them anywhere. I just like seeing the pictures of all the kids dressed up. My neighbor's kids dressed up as a cow. I thought that was pretty funny. Of course, there's a ninja, and I've been seeing lots of really fun pictures. So if you want to share, by all means, Kim@KimIverson.com is where you can share them with me, and I won't post them unless you tell me that I could post it because it's just such a cute one that you'll let me put it on Twitter or something like that. Before we get into tonight's show, we do have a lot to cover tonight. Let's go ahead and get to our first sponsor for tonight. This is a great product. It is called Lean, and this is going to help you shed those pounds because you probably need to after you ate all that Halloween candy. Yeah, we know you did it, right? You ate all that chocolate candy. I'm a big fan of the sour stuff myself, but sometimes I'll sneak in, that chocolate, and that unfortunately makes you really fat. In fact, all the sugar does. What's great about what's great about Lean, and the website to go to is takelean.com, is that this product is going to help lower your blood sugar levels. It's going to help you burn the fat off of your body. It is going to help you metabolize that fat. It's going to help you curb your appetite. You're going to need that if you're trying to lose weight. So it's a really great product, all natural supplement. So you don't have to worry about taking big pharma meds to try to lose weight. But if you need to just get a little boost into your workout, a little boost in your weight loss journey, then this is a really great product. It takes about 3 weeks for it to kick in, so give it a minute. But then once it does, you're going to have more energy during the day, and you're going to be losing that weight, and your metabolism is going to go up. So go to takelean.com, promo code Kim15, 15% off your first order. Again, takelean.com, promo code Kim15 for 15% off your first order. Okay. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, now that we're talking about him and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin appeared in front of the Appropriations Committee begging for money for Ukraine and Israel. As you know, or maybe you don't know, but I'm about to tell you, the House is trying to split up the bill. So Biden went out saying that he wants to give about $100 billion to both wars, saying that he was going to set aside quite a bit for Ukraine, the majority of it for Ukraine, and then a bit of it for Israel, about $15 billion for Israel. The House GOP is not thrilled with this because many of them do not want to fund Ukraine anymore. There's waning support on that. And we're going to get to that a little bit later, how Zelensky is feeling extremely defeated and he just feels like he's talking to a brick wall. But Blinken and Lloyd Austin went in front of the Appropriations Committee, basically making the case as to why the United States needs to give $105 billion to Ukraine and Israel. And they say that we need to give them this money. It's a matter of must because we can't show that we're weak. They said that we've got to contain China. We've got to protect democracy. And that if we don't do this in Israel and Ukraine, that it might seep over and we end up having a real risk here in the United States that we could just lose everything that we've stood for when it comes to democracy. A lot of problems with that. First of all, Ukraine is an incredibly corrupt country. And that is something that we're going to get into. This incredible piece put out by Simon Schuster with Time did this expose where he was able to follow Zelensky. He's reporting from Kiev, was able to follow Zelensky and follow his team around and really get the inside scoop as to what's going on. And there is a boatload of corruption going on in Ukraine, is what he discovered. So what kind of a democracy is it really? I mean, but then again, we got a lot of corruption in our government. So then you have to ask, how much of a democracy are we when we have so many corrupt figures? But I think in Ukraine, it's like, tenfold, like a lot more corruption going on, where they're really siphoning money off of, we give them a bunch of money, and a lot of the players there start siphoning off the money for their own stuff, for their own personal pleasures, vacations, expensive items and whatnot, just increasing their own personal wealth. So there's a real problem with that in Ukraine. So, as we are protecting democracy, are we just trying to continue this money laundering scheme? It looks like Ukraine is looking more and more like it's a resource for money laundering. So what are we really doing there? And as far as Israel, again, you've got essentially, you've got Netanyahu there, who's been trying to consolidate his power. The man has been in power for much longer than any U.S. president could ever sit in power for. We're talking, this guy has been in since in the 90s. He's been in since the 90s. So a very long time. So he's been in since Bill Clinton. So you've got Clinton, and who came after Clinton? Then it was Bush, and then Obama, and then Trump. So, he's been around for a really long time, Netanyahu has. And on top of that, he has tried to erode Israel's democracy by eroding the Supreme Court, their ability to actually enact checks and balances, further consolidating Netanyahu's power. So it's questionable. If any other country were to have done that, they would have been criticized. If that were when it was China, when Xi was consolidating his power, when it was Putin consolidating his power, or making it to where they could run indefinitely the same way Netanyahu can, that was criticized. But when Israel does it, it's still a democracy. So there's a lot of questions around what do we consider a democracy versus what a real democracy actually is, or what it should be. But nonetheless, they're saying we've got to do this because we have to protect democracy. That's the reason why we wage wars. They're saying we need to do it because we need to show China and contain China. And then also, if we lose these wars, they argued, then it would show our enemies, China, aka China and Russia, we have to win, basically. We can't lose, otherwise it shows them something we don't want them to see. I don't know exactly why we need to, we're not fighting, so we're not in these wars, actually. We're just giving a bunch of money and military weapons over to these countries. So what are we showing off exactly? Are we showing off our military might? No, we're not. We're showing off how much money we're willing to. We're trying to get into a race of who could go broke fastest. I mean, that's what it looks like. And so China's like, wow, I guess they really want to go broke. I guess that's what they're, angling to do. It's just a very bizarre place to be, to say we have to do this in order to show our enemies. What are you trying to show them? That's a question that I wish somebody on those committees would actually ask these guys, rather than just gobbling up these lines that people are just kind of programmed to say without thinking. One of those being, we need to show our enemies. Otherwise, okay, what are you showing them, though? What is exactly you're trying to convey by spending $105 billion? They also talked about how if we don't give them all this money, and if they don't win, then we're going to be playing whack-a-mole, they say, because these our enemies are going to grow stronger, and they're going to potentially expand, and we're going to have a harder time defeating them in the future. So we have to do it now, because if we don't do it now, later is going to be too late, is kind of what they were arguing on this. Some of the GOP senators, interestingly, are interested in cutting funding to the IRS. They don't like that money that's going to the IRS to hire the 83,000 extra agents. And so they're saying, why don't we cut from that? And you can have some of your money for your war if you cut from the IRS. But the Biden administration doesn't want to go for that. So there's, some interesting things at play. We're going to see how, if they end up giving that $105 billion, right now, the House Republicans have been able to pretty much separate the bills. So $14.3 billion is supposed to be going through and voted on for just Israel funding. But this is still up in the air, and there's still a lot of angling going on. And so there's a possibility that these do get lumped together, that these packages get lumped together. And we do see an enormous aid package being voted on for Ukraine and for Israel while the United States suffers. And we've got all kinds of problems in our own country, but we're just going to go ahead and fund endless war. And the big question is, what are these wars trying to accomplish themselves? Because, who, let me just save that. Let me just save that. And we'll get into how do you win these wars? What classifies as winning these wars? That's a big question to ask. We have been engaged in endless wars in the Middle East without any real, at what point do we know we've won? How do you win a war on terror? Those are big questions. But first, let me just show you this video. I watched the entire Blinken and Lloyd Austin, the testimony in front of the Appropriations Committee. This is one of the things that happened. This actually happened throughout their testimony. This same sort of thing kept happening over and over and over again. But look at this. This is Medea Benjamin with Code Pink rising up, confronting him during his Appropriations Committee hearing and yelling at the back of the room that we want a ceasefire. Watch this.
Not shrinking back. Not in the face of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Not in the face of an intensifying strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific and around the world.
If the witness will suspend, and I ask that everyone again respect this hearing, we will suspend until the room is cleared.
Is calling for a ceasefire. Shame on you all. The world is calling for a ceasefire. The American people don't want to support this brutal war. Stop the war. Stop the ceasefire now. Stop funding this brutal massacre that Israel is doing on the people of Gaza. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now.
Thank you, Senator Blinken. If you can continue.
Good for her. That ended up happening several times, not with her, just her, but others. You could see all those people raising their hands. They have representing the blood on the hands, the red hands. Many more people continued to do this throughout his testimony. At the end of the testimony, it kind of required Antony Blinken to address this because it had happened over and over throughout his hearing. And so he said, I've heard you. We are trying to limit and mitigate civilian casualties. That is on all of our minds. We're really, truly trying to do this while at the same time trying to reach our goals, essentially, which is what exactly? And that is the big question. What are the goals? Let's go into this great piece that was done by Simon Schuster in Kiev for Time, following Zelensky around, looking into his operations and into his presidency and his advisors. And really just this piece showcased a defeated Zelensky. Look at the title of it even. Nobody believes in our victory like I do. Inside Volodymyr Zelensky's struggle to keep Ukraine in the fight. Let me read some excerpts to you because this is where we're at with this war. And I think that this is how many people, the big question is, why did we get them into this war if we were just going to lose interest and walk away and leave them completely defeated and with no real strategy? Let me just read some of this to you. He says, nobody believes in our victory like I do. Nobody, Zelensky told Time in an interview after his trip. Instilling that belief in his allies, he said, takes all your power, your energy. You understand it takes so much of everything. It's only getting harder. 20 months into the war, about a fifth of Ukraine's territory remains under Russian occupation. Tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians have been killed, and Zelensky can feel during his travels that global interest in the war has slackened. Yeah. So has the level of international support. Says, quote, the scariest thing is that part of the world got used to the war in Ukraine, he says. Exhaustion with the war rolls along like a wave. You see it in the United States, in Europe, and we see that as soon as they start to get a little tired, it becomes like a show to them. I can't watch this rerun for the 10th time. Public support for aid to Ukraine has been in decline for months in the U.S., and Zelensky's visit did nothing to revive it. Some 41% of Americans want Congress to provide more weapons to Kiev, down from 65% in June. So less than half of people want to provide more weapons to help Ukraine fight Russia. When Ukraine began a major counteroffensive, if you remember that, they were like, we're gearing up for that counteroffensive. We're going to strike back. We're going to gain back some more land. But it ended up not going very well. It ended up, they had very minimal gains, lots of losses. It was very slow. It was extremely underwhelming. And that's what this timepiece points out, that offensive has proceeded at an excruciating pace and with enormous losses, making it ever more difficult for Zelensky to convince partners that victory is around the corner. With the outbreak of war in Israel, even keeping the world's attention on Ukraine has become a major challenge. We have short attention spans in this country. You just watch the news cycle and tragedy strikes, all eyeballs are glued on that tragedy until the next one. And then we move on to the next one. So Ukraine is in no different of a position. They certainly had 100% of our attention for quite some time, but absolutely they don't now. Now all eyes are on Israel. So Kiev is feeling abandoned, ignored. They're feeling like the broken up with lover. After his visit to Washington, if you remember, he came to Washington this second time. The first time he spoke, got all those standing ovations. The second time, it was just kind of a trip, and it was almost, it was like, oh, Zelensky's here. And that was kind of it. Said time followed the president and his team back to Kiev, hoping to understand how they would react to the signals they had received, especially the insistent calls for Zelensky to fight corruption inside his own government and the fading enthusiasm for a war with no end in sight. That's the thing. There's no end in sight to this war. Russia still is holding on to the territory it's taken, and they're not going to be battled back. They're not going to give it back. So the end, we all knew going into this that Russia was going to achieve a significant amount of what it set out to achieve. And that in the end, land would absolutely be lost to Russia, and so would many lives. And so many of us said, this is not worth the battle. Don't fight this. Negotiate. Go in there and look for peace. Try to come up with an agreement. You're already in a civil war with Donbass for the last decade nearly. Crimea's been gone for a near decade as well. Give them up. Give up that territory. It wasn't yours anyway. You weren't managing it. They didn't want you around. It's not like you got kicked out. They had already kicked you out. So let those areas be run by Russia. Let them have that in exchange for the peace. They didn't want to do that. People called us out saying that we were terrible human beings for even calling for peace. And instead now, this timepiece puts out there that over 100,000 Ukrainians have been killed. 100,000 Ukrainians killed. Now, put that into perspective with what's going on in Gaza. For example, they have 8,500 people killed, civilians. So it's terrible. 100,000, many of which were civilians. Horrific in Ukraine. But nobody was calling for peace, and still not. This goes on to say that on my first day in Kiev, this is Simon speaking, I asked one member of his circle how the president was feeling. And the response came without a second's hesitation: angry. They say that, he used to have a lot of sparkle and optimism and, the lighthearted kind of Zelensky with a sense of humor. But now they say that he walks in, he gets the updates, he gives the orders, he walks out, and that's it. That most of all, Zelensky feels betrayed by his Western allies, that they've left him without the means to win the war, only means to survive it. Well, no kidding. That was obviously happening from the beginning. Many of us knew, how are you ever going to fight this war and win this war? If we're not sending American troops in, which I'm absolutely not in favor of, but if you're not going to send troops in, there was no way Ukraine was going to win this war. There was no way. And most of us absolutely knew that. If you just looked at this logically rather than emotionally, you could see there was no way Ukraine was going to win this. So this endless giving them money, endless giving them weapons, none of it, they weren't going to be able to beat Russia back. You can't fight a superpower like Russia with that mighty of a military. It's nearly impossible. And so this is going to be, if they're going to have a win, which, okay, there is a possibility Ukraine could win. There's a possibility that they could gain all that land back, but it won't be anytime soon. We're talking decades. We're talking, this would be a stalemate like North and South Korea, that it would have to be just a frozen war, a cold war. And then maybe at some point, there's a lot of like little acts of terrorism or militia rising up, and maybe there's infighting, and they kind of get into Donbass and they sway hearts and minds, and they're able to get militia groups to rise up and kind of fight from within. I mean, anything's possible. All of that's possible. But that would take a really long time, a really, really long time. So they say, despite the recent setbacks on the battlefield, he does not intend to give up fighting or to sue for any kind of peace. It says, ultimately, victory over Russia has hardened him into a form that worries some of his advisors. It is immovable, verging on the messianic. He deludes himself, one of his closest aides tells me in frustration. We're out of options. We're not winning, but try telling him that. So even the Ukrainians know. His top aides are saying, we're not winning this war. You're deluding yourself if you think you're going to win. So at least the Ukrainians are, it's just Zelensky, and Zelensky's allied with the West, his big tour of going around and being paraded around and championed, kids dressing up as him for Halloween. So he's got this deluded idea that the West is going to stick with him, and they're not. The West is not. This is so sad. This is, to me, incredibly horrible and sad. We should have never, this is our fault. This is our fault. We should have never put Ukraine in this position. We should have been the bigger, wiser, and we should have known, and we should have said, you need to negotiate for peace. Russia's on your border. Your country isn't moving. Russia's not suddenly not going to be your neighbor. You're going to be neighbors forever. So you need to get along. And guess what? The West, we're not on your borders, really. We're not really neighbors. You're never going to be accepted into the West like Germany or France or the UK. It's just not realistic. You've been asking to be in NATO for all of these years. It's never happened. And meanwhile, we turn around, and with Finland and Sweden, we pretty much just bring them right on into NATO the first minute they say, I'm interested. Ukraine has been courting us for a decade, trying to get into NATO with no avail. I mean, this whole thing is devastating. It's devastating that we put these people on the wrong path, that we truly did, that this was totally our fault. And now Zelensky's stubborn. He doesn't want to lose. He had all of that happen. He's still caught up in that. Says Zelensky's stubbornness, some of his aides say, has hurt their team's efforts to come up with a new strategy, a new message. As they've debated the future of the war, one issue has remained taboo: the possibility of negotiating a peace deal with the Russians. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to do it. Judging by recent surveys, most Ukrainians would reject such a move, especially if it entailed the loss of any occupied territory. Yeah, so the Ukrainians don't even really want to give up either. They don't want to give up those territories. They don't want to lose the war. Nobody wants to lose. Losing is never fun. Zelensky remains dead set against even a temporary truce. For us, it would mean leaving this wound open for future generations, he said. Maybe it would calm some people down inside of our country and outside, at least those who want to wrap things up at a nice price. But for me, that's a problem because we are left with this explosive force. We only delay its detonation. He describes this as a war of wills. He says, I've long lived with this fear. A third world war could start in Ukraine, continue in Israel, and move on there to Asia, and then explode somewhere else. That was his message in Washington. Help Ukraine stop the war before it spreads and before it's too late. And he worries his audience has stopped paying attention. These are massively different wars. The war in Ukraine is against Russia. Israel and Russia are not going to go to war against one another. They're allies, they're friends, they're buddies. Israel's certainly, I think, more allied with the United States, but I think it's I think Israel can kind of go with whoever they think is going to help them in that moment. I think that Israel looks out for itself. This is something Americans could kind of learn. It'd be kind of nice. But Israel looks out for itself. So Israel is going to go with whichever country is going to ally and help Israel the most. And if that's China, Israel will do it. If it's Russia, which they are friendly, many Israelis are actually, 15% of their population is native Russian speaking. Many more understand Russian. Many of them, the vast majority of the immigrants who'd come in for a long period of time actually had come in from the old USSR. So there's a strong bond there, a tie there. This piece goes on to say that when he came to Washington this last time around, that members of Congress basically said to him, that senators and members of Congress were like, look, you got corruption. You got a lot of corruption. And we got to deal with this corruption. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? And he said, yeah, I know it's a big problem. We're working on it. We're trying to get rid of this corruption. So he fired a lot of people inside of his the people that were helping him with the war and his government officials. He fired a lot of them. The top aides there, according to this piece, say that Zelensky himself is not corrupt, actually. I know there's a lot of suspicion there, but says that the people around him are saying, no, he doesn't do it. He actually doesn't dip into the pie, but a lot of people around him do. And they said that they fired a lot of them, but then it didn't matter because the next round comes in and everybody just knows that corruption is the name of the game and they all start siphoning money. And so it's a big beast and a big problem, and they have not been able to get it under control. So we're right now talking about giving $105 billion to Israel and Ukraine, most of that to Ukraine, and yet we have admittedly a money laundering problem in Ukraine. But we're still talking about it. That makes you wonder who else is involved in that money laundering. What's to benefit some of these lawmakers who are really dead set on continuing to give money to Ukraine? Angus King, an independent senator from Maine, recalled the Ukrainian leader telling the audience when he had the private meeting with some of these lawmakers, he says, you're giving money, we're giving our lives. But that statement wasn't enough because 10 days later, Congress passed a bill to temporarily avert government shutdown with no assistance for Ukraine. Americans aren't caring about Ukrainian lives. That's just not something anybody's thinking about. Mitt Romney even said, yeah, this is a great investment. We're spending less and none of our guys are dying. 100,000 Ukrainians, but none of our guys. Saying that Zelensky has been trying to say he wants to have a new strategy, he wants to retake certain cities, that he's trying to rally up the troops, rally up their motivation, telling them we're going to take this, we're going to take that, we're going to strike here, we're going to strike there. And the people, his military is coming back saying, with what? That they don't have the men or the weapons. Where are the weapons? Where's the artillery? And even if we had all of that, where are the men? We don't have the men. So they said even if the West gave them a bunch of weapons, they don't have anybody to use them. So really, they don't have any recruitments. The recruits are down. They've now started dipping into older and older. So now they've got, at first it was like 20 and early 30s. Now they're going into people into their mid 40s. So they're really just running through. This whole thing is just very sad. We should have absolutely been calling for peace this entire time. Essentially, this whole thing, this whole story from Time just really showcases a defeated Zelensky. And he's out of options. Money isn't going to save him. More military isn't going to save him. More military weapons. He doesn't even have the people to use those weapons. Basically, the only option it looks like for Ukraine is we either go in, we actually put NATO troops in Ukraine and actually start fighting a hot war with Russia, or we somehow get Ukraine to a resolution on this. Who is going to do that? Who's going to get them? Certainly not this administration. Maybe if another person wins the election this next time around, because they're not the ones who pushed for the war, they might say, okay, it's time to come to a peace agreement, and they might start to discuss with Zelensky how we get to that point. That's the only thing we can really hope for. I don't think we're going to have boots on the ground in Ukraine. I don't see that happening. But I also don't see the Biden administration calling for some sort of peace agreement with Russia. Everybody would be a loser in Washington at this point, by everybody except for the few GOP lawmakers who are saying, why are we doing this? Let's not give any more money. Why don't, this isn't worth it. This isn't something we should be doing. Only those lawmakers are going to kind of stand out later on as they were the right ones, and everybody else could be ridiculed, or look at how much spending you did on this war and how much you supported this war, and the war got us nothing. It literally, the only thing it gets us is a loss. I mean, it's even worse than getting nothing. It costs us. As Anthony Blinken is sitting there in front of the Appropriations Committee saying, we have to win because otherwise, and he's right, we have to win, otherwise we show our enemies that we're weak. Yeah, well, should have thought about that before you even got into a war that you were not going to win. There was no way for this to win. So you just marched us right on in there, only to make us look weak and stupid, spending a bunch of money and costing a bunch, and heartless. letting a bunch of Ukrainians die on behalf of our own personal vendetta with Russia. But that's so it's a very sad situation. I just wanted to give you guys an update with what's going on with Ukraine because Ukraine, I mean, basically, it's like Israel ended the war in Ukraine. Certainly, the coverage on Israel, we've just completely forgotten about Ukraine. Zelensky's feeling that, Ukraine is feeling that, and now I don't know what their future holds, but I know it's not going to be good. They're just going to have to come to a peace agreement with Russia, and hopefully, there can be, some way forward. A frozen conflict is not good. That's not going to be a good situation either. They really just need to go into a peace agreement. But we've been saying that now for a while, and no one has been listening. So, that's just the state of war, unfortunately, in this country. We haven't been able to win a war in a really long time, and it doesn't look like we're going to either with this one. That's for sure. It's not going to start now. So. All right, guys, I want to tell you about Cozy Earth. This is a really awesome sheet company. They make more than just sheets. They make all kinds of amazing bedding. They even make like comfy clothes. As you get into winter, you're going to be wanting to get all snuggly in your comfy clothes as you sit around sipping hot cocoa in front of, the Christmas lights or whatever it is that you decorate your house with, if you do that at all. Or just, you want to cozy up because it's cold. It's cold outside. You want to cozy up in front of a fire. Well, this company is awesome. They make really high quality stuff, and it really is better. It is, I'm not going to lie. It's expensive. I bought my husband a blanket and some pillowcases with my own money. I paid for it, and I used my discount code. I'm not stupid. But the bedding is just fantastic. And all you've got to do is just swap out what you're currently using, and you will use this great company, Cozy Earth. These are soft, they're breathable, they're temperature regulating, which is really important, but they're really soft, they're really cozy, and they're really great at temper regulation. So if you can try these out, they have this really awesome guarantee, 100 nights. So you can try them out for 100 nights. And if you do not like it, then you just send them back and no questions asked, and they'll even refund you the shipping. So so just try it out. If you don't like it, I know you're going to get there and you're going to be like, well, these are luxury. So these are expensive. And then you're like, whoa. Yeah, well, if you don't like it, if you think they're not worth it, I can't believe I spent my money on that, then you can get your money back. But I'm telling you, you won't be able to send them back. You just won't, because they're so comfortable. So go to CozyEarth.com. These are made from viscose from bamboo, but really high quality stuff. I researched this, looking into it, like, how is this different from other viscose from bamboo companies? And I did the cheap thing. I went online. I was like, well, I can order other ones. So I did it. I went online and I ordered different sheets that were cheaper, and I tried them out thinking, oh, it's going to be the same. It wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same. I'm not lying to you. So check these out. Go to CozyEarth.com. Use the code Iverson, and you will get 40% off. You'll want to use that for sure. Code Iverson, 40% off when you visit CozyEarth.com. Try them out for 100 nights. If you don't like them, if you don't sleep cooler, send them back for a full refund. Okay, guys? CozyEarth.com, 40% off when you use the code Iverson. Reports have come out that Israel has bombed a refugee camp in Gaza, the Jabalia refugee, it's Jabalia refugee camp, which is actually the largest Palestinian camp in all of, I think actually inside of any of the territory of Palestine. I think that this is the largest of the refugee camps. And this is the carnage from that. You can see these are large craters. There's a lot of people around. They're saying that they're not 100% certain of the casualties. They know it's dozens of people. The initial report coming out was about 300 or 400 people have been injured or killed. The number now coming from the ministry, the Hamas ministry, is about 50 casualties. 50 deaths is what they're saying. Hundreds of casualties. That's a lot of people injured, but 50 deaths is what they're claiming at this point, but a lot of people are still buried underneath the rubble. This is one that the IDF did confirm. So if you remember the hospital blast, which we're going to get into a little bit later, But there was a lot of reporting about the hospital blast and about this hospital killing 500 people. And so a lot of people kind of now take a step back when it came to the Christian church being bombed in Gaza. Now, when it comes to this refugee camp being bombed, everybody takes like a minute to kind of wait and see. And it turns out that the IDF actually did admit to this. And they even actually did an interview with Wolf Blitzer. This is the IDF spokesman confirming to Wolf Blitzer on CNN that it was an Israeli airstrike. And he goes on to say that, yeah, there were civilians. Watch this. This is incredible. Watch this interview.
But even if that Hamas commander was there amidst all those Palestinian refugees who are in that Jabalia refugee camp, Israel still went ahead and dropped a bomb there, attempting to kill this Hamas commander, knowing that a lot of innocent civilians, men, women, and children, presumably would be killed. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's not what you're hearing, Wolf. We're focused on this commander, again, who you'll get more data who this man was. Killed many, many Israelis. We're doing everything we can. It's a very complicated battle space. There could be infrastructure there. There could be tunnels there. We're still looking into it, and we'll give you more data as the hour moves ahead.
But you know that there are a lot of refugees, a lot of innocent civilians, men, women, and children in that refugee camp as well, right?
This is the tragedy of war, Wolf. I mean, as you know, we've been saying for days, move south. Civilians that are not involved with Hamas, please move south.
I'm just trying to get a little bit more information. You knew there were civilians there. You knew there were refugees, all sorts of refugees, but you decided to still drop a bomb on that refugee camp, attempting to kill the Hamas commander. By the way, was he killed?
I can't confirm yet. There'll be more updated. Yes, we know that he was killed. About the civilians there, we're doing everything we can to minimize. I'll say it again. Sadly, they are hiding themselves within civilian population. And again, we are doing this stage by stage, and we're going to go after every one of these terrorists who was involved in that heinous attack on the 7th of October. Wolf.
Yeah, Wolf Blitzer even, the reason why that's incredible is because Wolf Blitzer used to work for AIPAC. He's, and even he was sitting there saying, but you knew there were innocent civilians there and you still decided to bomb it anyway. And did you even get that leader? And the guy's like, we'll confirm that later. So dozens of people being killed, all to get one guy. More reports have come out from the Israeli sources saying, well, but the tunnels collapsed underneath the buildings. There were tunnels there, and we were able to collapse those. Look, the tunnel system runs, from what we understand, it's a spider web that runs all throughout Gaza. That would be an excuse to bomb the whole place, and the Israelis certainly seem to use that often as the excuse to bomb just indiscriminately anywhere they want. A refugee camp that is densely populated, filled with women and children, and innocent civilians, and they elderly, and they just choose to bomb the place, knowing that there's no real place for these injured people to go, that the hospital system is collapsing, that they don't have, they're not getting any of the supplies that they need into Gaza. It is and then you hear that IDF spokesman saying, well, we've told everybody to move south, move south. This right here was just a warning. This was a warning to the people. We told you to leave. We want you to move. We want you to evacuate. They're trying to clear the area. They're wanting everyone to leave is what they're asking for. Everyone needs to leave. So rather than just saying, well, make sure that you don't have any Hamas leaders hiding amongst you. If they're there, I would expel them out of your building. Otherwise, they're going to be targeted. And it's also incredible that they could even have the intel to know where these leaders are when they claim that they had no intel on what happened for October 7th, that it's a surprise attack. They didn't know it was coming. But yet they can tell you exactly where these Hamas leaders are. They could tell you exactly where, they've got these phone calls. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. They've got these phone calls. They've got that they're recording. It's like, so they're surveilling everybody. They know where everybody is. They can see the tunnel systems, supposedly, which is everywhere. And yet they excuse, it's like, well, civilians, they were in the way. And unfortunately, Hamas hides all their stuff amongst the civilians. And we hear this all the time as an excuse for bombing. What about all those Hamas fighters that were hiding amongst, they broke into Israel and they were hiding amongst the Israelis. Was that an excuse for then the IDF to go and carpet bomb schools in Israel? Would they do that looking for one Hamas fighter? Would they sacrifice 50 children for one Hamas fighter and say, well, he hid amongst the civilians, and so sorry about that? This is collective punishment. And this is meant to get the people to leave. It's meant to scare them of nowhere is safe. The people in Gaza, however, say that they're even bombing in the south, and so there's no safety there either. That so they're just kind of bombing everywhere and leaving everybody in rubble. But this has been confirmed by the IDF spokesman, as you know, and this is just absolutely tragic that this just continues to happen. These are, by international standards, these are considered war crimes by international standards. You are not to bomb indiscriminately civilians. We actually, in the United States, when we drone places throughout the Middle East, when we were in other wars, Americans were outraged whenever there would be a bomb that would take out 10 civilians, or a wedding of civilians, or a bus school of children. These were things that made the news in the United States as like, we should not be doing this. We do not want our military doing this. And we called them out for that. And they tried to mitigate, lessen it. But the IDF they're using a lot of excuses in order to just, a lot of people are being killed in this situation. 8,500 civilians at this point. It is a very bad situation, and they're not. It's hard to believe that they're actually taking precautions to prevent civilian deaths when they know that these tunnels are everywhere. Hamas is everywhere, and there's no getting rid of Hamas. This whole idea that you're going to root out Hamas. The leaders are not even sitting in Gaza; they're in other countries. Hamas is based on the Muslim Brotherhood, the ideology. You wipe out Hamas in Gaza, and there's Hamas in other places in the Middle East. Islamic fundamentalism is throughout the Middle East, but you certainly are going to anger people who are just mad. 87%, I just was reading a stat that over 80% will say of the Hamas fighters were orphaned, essentially. They were children of parents who had, one or more of their parents had been killed by Israeli airstrikes. And so or in the previous wars. And so they're angry. They're rising up. They're trying to get justice. They're trying to break free out of this terrible place that they've been put in. So it's a really bad situation. But we have confirmed this one. And that takes me to the hospital. I want to talk about the update on the hospital blast. What had happened, if you remember, was that the hospital, the Al Ali hospital, there were reports that it had been bombed by the Israelis, that 500 people were killed. Many of us assumed that meant the hospital. Well, we heard reports from inside medical professionals, Doctors Without Borders. There's also Israeli spokespeople that came out initially. Their social media spokesperson initially came out confirming that the hospital had been struck, saying, oh, it's a tragedy. Too bad Hamas hides in the hospital. There were doctors there that said the hospital had been struck right in the center of the hospital, that it wasn't adjacent to the hospital, that the hospital itself was struck. Then the fog clears and we find out that it was, there's still quite a few casualties on that one. We're not 100% certain of the numbers on that. There's a lot of questioning of Hamas's numbers, but The Intercept recently did a piece where they fact-checked the numbers that Hamas gave and the names on the list that Hamas gave to several other organizations. They also looked for the names of people that they knew were killed, and they found less. They had confirmed deaths, and some of the names that they had, they did not find on the register. So they concluded that in some instances, Hamas is undercounting the deaths, that they're not getting everybody on these lists. But these lists have been shown by international fact checkers and other organizations to be pretty accurate lists, that Hamas is not inflating its numbers. But when it comes to the hospital blast, the Al Ali hospital blast, we still, there's a lot of, a lot that is just not quite clear on this. Hamas says that 471 people were killed. Others claim, if you read other sources, they'll say, oh, no, that number is closer to 50 or it's close. But certainly what we do know is that 8,500 people have been killed throughout Gaza. New York Times initially reported that Israel had struck the hospital. They then retracted later and said, we're sorry for relying on Hamas for that information on their ministry, their Palestinian health ministry, which is run by Hamas. Sorry for relying on what they said. Others came out saying actually it was just a misinterpretation from the get-go, that Hamas had said that there were 500 casualties, about 500 casualties, and people interpreted that as death when actually it could be injury or death. So there was a lot of confusion there. It turned out when the fog settled that it was a parking lot that was hit. Then people wondered, how could there be so many deaths in a parking lot? Well, it turned out that a lot of the people that were evacuating, that had moved from the north, that were moving, trying to get out of their homes or their houses had already been bombed, they were there in the parking lot. It was kind of like a place where these refugees were gathering, and that's why there were so many people there. And that's why when it was hit, it ended up causing a lot of casualties. Now, the IDF came out saying, we have proof and let us show it to you. There's proof that this actually was a failed rocket from the Islamic Jihad. So they didn't blame it on Hamas, but they also didn't take ownership of it either. They said, no, it's this other militia group, and they fired it from behind the hospital. And there's a cemetery back there, and they fired this rocket off from behind the hospital, and it failed, and it fell down from the sky, and it instead hit these people, and it was the Islamic Jihad. That was who it was. Then they later on came out with a video and they said, see, this is the evidence of it. But the video showed the rocket coming from a completely different direction than the cemetery behind the hospital. So it was already really suspect there that you said it was coming from behind the hospital, but you show us a video of it coming from somewhere else. So because there was no evidence of a rocket being fired from behind the hospital, there was lots of cameras that were live that night in the direction of that hospital, and none of them caught anything like that. The one thing that was caught on camera that looked like it failed was coming from a different direction, and Israel looked at that and said, that's the one, that's the one. So then they were saying, well, okay, maybe it didn't come from the cemetery, but it came from somewhere else in Gaza. So there's a lot of confusion on this one, on what actually caused this blast. Well, the New York Times visual investigation team, alongside, they got this idea somewhere else, by the way. We're going to go over what their investigation showed, but they got this idea actually from other independent visual investigators who had whose jobs, there's actually this one organization where their job is to just count. They don't editorialize. They don't say anything about how they feel about anything. This is just a group that literally counts and uses numbers, and they're just saying, this is how many tanks have been. What they're doing right now, their task right now as an organization is to track the vehicle and military losses in this war with Israel. So they're kind of a data science-centric organization. And one of those guys from that organization analyzed the footage from a variety of videos and was able to actually pinpoint where this rocket came from that Israel used as the video evidence of the rocket failing and hitting the hospital. This is a video there. So this is a video. They said, that's the rocket. And there it goes, falling from the sky, hitting the hospitals with because then moments later, there's the blast at the hospital. There it is. And they say, see that? That thing failed, hit the hospital, and that's the one. So the New York Times team took this investigation that was done by this other organization, and they went deeper into it to figure out if that was accurate. And let's go ahead and go over what they discovered. They discovered that the IDF's video, that rocket, absolutely, without a doubt, well, they can't say without a doubt 100%, but they could say 99% that came from one of the Iron Dome sites in Israel, that was an Israeli rocket, that's what that was. That was an it was one of from their Iron Dome that's supposed to intercept. It was an Iron Dome interceptor is what it's called. And they said that's what it was. And it came from Israel. And they were able to pinpoint exactly where from the Iron Dome it came from. And they said the only reason why they can't give a 100% conclusion on that is because they don't have a fragment of the actual rocket. They also said that that's not the one that hit the hospital. So they said two things. First of all, the rocket shown in the video, they were able to conclude is an Israeli rocket. Secondly, they were also able to conclude that rocket did not hit the hospital, that rocket failed 2 miles further away from the hospital. So this is not the one that caused the damage. And that's all they concluded. They're not concluding anything more than that. They do not know what hit the hospital. They don't have any evidence of whether or not it was a failed rocket from the PIJ. They don't know if it was a failed rocket from Hamas, and they don't know if it was failed rocket from Israel or if it was a targeted strike from Israel, or even a targeted strike from one of the other groups. They don't know what hit the hospital, but what they know is what the IDF uses as evidence, as surefire evidence that it was a Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It was a PIJ or a Hamas rocket, failed rocket that hit the hospital. They're saying, no, that's not accurate. What we know is that's not accurate. So in the end, we don't know anything. We still don't know anything, but we know that the evidence the Israelis has presented is not accurate. So here is the thread from the. Let me just go over this. Let me find the tweet stack for you. So this is Eric Toller with the New York Times visual investigations found. So they said Israeli and U.S. intelligence officials believe that a projectile captured on video shortly before the Ali Arab Hospital explosion was a Palestinian rocket. But New York Times visual investigations found that this object was launched from Israel and likely unrelated to the deadly blast. Okay. They go on to say an IDF spokesperson, and you can see the video. These are various video angles of that same exact rocket. So they were able to geolocate it based on the various different video footage they received, where those cameras were placed, and they were able to geolocate it. So they said an IDF spokesperson, if you remember, went on CNN and BBC with a printout screenshot from Al Jazeera live stream showing this projectile, claiming it was the rocket that hit the hospital. We also believe that American officials are incorrectly assessing this to be a Palestinian rocket. We geolocated 5 videos that showed this projectile launched from the north, south, east, and west. By drawing lines of perspective, 3 of which can be seen here, we assess that this project was launched from near the Israeli city of Nahal Oz. We cannot say with confidence what exactly this projectile is, but we know that there's at least one Iron Dome launch site in nearly that same location that overlaps from the sight lines we drew from the 5 videos. This site was still present in satellite imagery this year. So they believe that site exists, it was there, and that's where the lines led them. This projectile may have been launched in reaction to barrages of rockets from Gaza. A timeline, they said the Palestinian rocket barrage, so they were firing off rockets. And, the Palestinians fire off a bunch of rockets because they know there's that Iron Dome. So they're trying to fire off as many as they can. That's why you see so many coming out of Gaza. They do this as a strategy. Fire off as many as they can. They hope that the Iron Dome interceptors, they know they're going to get some of them, but they hope one's going to sneak through. That's why they do this kind of like massive barrage, because they know that they're up against the Iron Dome. So this projectile may have been launched in reaction to barrages of rockets from Gaza. A timeline, the Palestinian rocket barrages followed shortly by an Israeli projectile launch. So the Israelis, once they started getting the firing from Gaza, they started firing their own rockets. 17.5 seconds in the air before the projectile detonates, and then there's an explosion at the hospital 7 seconds later. That's why the Israelis are like, see, this is the one. It's there, it detonates in the air, and then it falls, and there's the hospital gets blown up 7 seconds later. About 25 seconds passed from the last Palestinian rocket fired an Israeli projectile to the hospital explosion. So there's no visual evidence that we have found that directly links these events to the blast at the Al Ali Arab Hospital. The projectile launched from Israel detonates at least 2 miles from the hospital, and 25 seconds passed from when the final Palestinian rocket was launched in these videos and the hospital explosion. So they say the situation in the area around the hospital was chaotic that evening. That Al Jazeera live stream of the scene plus other videos were reviewed shows at least 2 large explosions near the hospital in the minutes before the deadly blast. You can see those blasts. I think there might be another one that happens. You can see that black smoke. And there's the other one. So the IDF told the Times that it was striking Gaza City that evening, but said that it was not in the area that would endanger the hospital. 3 days before the blast, a 155 millimeter illumination shell, commonly used by the Israeli military and not used by Palestinian militias, was fired into the Al Ali hospital Hospital administrators say that they had received warnings from the IDF telling them to evacuate. So the Israelis 3 days before did hit this hospital. And when they hit this hospital with this 155 illumination shell, you could see it didn't cause a big crater. It didn't collapse the building, right? I mean, it did, but it hit the hospital and it did damage. And they'd been told, we're going to hit you. We're going to hit you. We're going to hit you. It says our analysis does not answer what actually did cause the blast or who was responsible, but it does undercut one of the most publicized pieces of evidence used by both American and Israeli officials. So read our investigation below. Amazing work. And he gives all of his thanks. So he's saying right there, our analysis does not answer what actually did cause the blast or who was responsible, but it does undercut one of the most publicized pieces of evidence used by both American and Israeli officials. So, and many other experts have read over this and they have agreed. They've looked at the footage and they've said, yeah, this is that particular projectile that the Americans and the Israelis are pointing at as evidence definitely did not come from Palestine. That came from Israel. But based on what they saw, it also didn't hit the hospital. So it's still we do not know what happened. But what we do know is that Israel had been giving them warnings to get out, that we're going to bomb you. We do know that 3 days earlier they did bomb them. And we do know that the Israelis have a history of hitting hospitals, including that exact hospital 3 days earlier. We also know that there are a lot of failed Palestinian rockets, that these are homemade rockets. They're not that great and they fail. So we do know that happens. However, we also know that their homemade rockets, whether they work perfectly or they fail, don't kill that many people. They're not that powerful. So for them to wound or kill hundreds of people, even in a crowded parking lot, that still is also pretty questionable considering the type of rockets that they use. I mean, these guys, when their rockets don't fail, their rockets maybe kill 1 or 2 people. So when they fail, maybe it would have had to hit something else that would have then caused a larger, and we saw in the video kind of 2 looking like explosions coming from that hospital area. So it's possible, but that's the thing. We don't really know. We still don't know. But this idea that's been circulating around of, well, you guys were all wrong, and fanning the flames, and you guys were all wrong. And this is the truth. The truth is it was a failed rocket from the PIJ. Well, that's not true either. Nobody knows. We still just don't know who hit that hospital. What we do know is that the Israelis are absolutely bombing Gaza and that friendly fire does happen. Friendly fire does kill people. I do believe that there have been a lot of people in this conflict that have been killed by friendly fire on both sides. That is normal. That happens. The odds of that not happening would be next to impossible because in war, that's just what happens. But that's the thing. There needs to be some sort of an agreement, a negotiation. There's a lot of Israelis on the streets protesting. Michael Tracy's on the ground. They're in Israel right now, and he's been reporting that a lot of people are protesting the Netanyahu government. They're wanting a prisoner swap. They're wanting a hostage swap. There were a lot of people who were from Gaza on a day permit working in Israel. They are not back in Gaza. These are innocent people that were just working regular jobs in Israel as the laborers, and they have not been returned to Gaza either. But there's been no reports on who they are, and there's been no calling out, or at least just even labeling them hostages. What are they if they're not hostages? If they were just laboring around in Gaza and they get rounded up and they're not being returned. So a lot of people are calling for a hostage swap. That's what they want. And a lot of Israelis are calling for this, and they want a peaceful resolution to this conflict, and they want Netanyahu out, and then they want to deal with it. There's a lot of people still all in for war. There's a lot of people who still just want to have some sort of final, just they want Hamas gone and they want the Palestinians gone as well. It's a very tough situation for both sides over there for sure. The Palestinians are living in a blockade in one area, an occupation in another, and it's really atrocious. One other thing I want to kind of address on that is the question I see a lot is why are Americans caring so much about this conflict, but not other, a lot of suffering going on in the world. There's a lot of genocides or a lot of massacres. There's a lot of conflicts. Like, why are Americans just so involved in this particular one? Why are they marching in the streets so much for the Palestinians? And a lot of people are deducing, well, it's because of anti-Semitism. It's that when Jews do it, it's worse and people are angrier. And so they take to the streets and they speak up more than if the Saudis do it to the Yemeni people, for example. Or when it happens, you got a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I think the big issue with this particular conflict is a couple fold. First of all, the issue is Israel receives more money than any other foreign government, receives more American dollars than any other foreign government. So we are funding that government, and they are our number one recipient. And you've got politicians in America saying an attack on Israel is an attack on the United States. You don't hear them saying an attack on Saudi Arabia is an attack on the United States. That's why we're funding them against the Houthis. We're not saying that an attack on Azerbaijan is an attack on the United States. Like, we don't make these claims for any other country. So when the U.S. starts to say things like, when you attack Israel, you attack us, and we've got this pledge of allegiance that every single one on both sides of the aisle pledges their allegiance to this foreign Middle Eastern country and gives all of our money, a bunch of our money to them, and has over the course of decades, people are going to say, you're using my American dollars. I don't have any say over what Putin does. When people say, Kim, why don't you call for Russia to have a peace agreement with Ukraine and evacuate and retreat from Ukraine and stop the war? Because I don't have any power over Putin. That's up to the Russian people. I mean, I can give my ideas and my opinions on what I think Russia should do, or what I think any other country in the world should do, what I think China should do about XYZ or any other country. We don't give a bunch of money to Russia. I don't have any power over that situation. I do have power over Ukraine in that situation, because our law, or at least as American citizens who vote, we wish, or we think, or we'd like to imagine that we have some kind of power over our politicians. And so we have an ability to actually speak up and say, ceasefire in Ukraine, stop funding Ukraine, and get to a peace agreement. We have the power to say that about Ukraine and not really about Russia, because we don't have any power in Russia over what's going on there, because we're not spending our money there. Same thing with anywhere else in the world. We're not really spending a boatload of money. And so we don't have power. I don't have power over China. I can't say, hey, China, we're going to protest for whatever XYZ thing that we've decided to protest you over. I don't have any actual political power in China. Right? None of us really do, unless you are a Chinese citizen. And then in which case, or if you're a country that's allied with China and you're giving them a bunch of money if they have allies like that. I don't think China takes a bunch of money from other countries. So we don't have power there. We have power over Taiwan, a little bit more over that situation, right? Because our government is saying to Taiwan, we'll defend you at all costs. Well, we as Americans actually have ideally a say over that. And we can say to our government leaders, we don't want you to do that. That's not something we want you to do. So we can protest that. We can have our voices heard. We can get online, use social media. We can get on the news. We can lobby the lawmakers. We can have Medea Benjamin stand up and say, ceasefire, ceasefire. Now you have blood on your hands. And we could do a lot of things, but only within the framework of what we have and what we have control over. We don't have control over foreign countries. We don't have control over Palestine. People say, well, why don't you call for Hamas to release the hostages? What kind of power does any American have over Palestine and Hamas? I mean, we don't have that kind of power, but we have power when it comes to Israel because our government funds them. So when anytime anybody asks these questions, well, why aren't you advocating for this country or that country or these people or those people? And it's because all we can do is all we can do as Americans. We can't go beyond that. Our voices are meaningless to other countries. It's like Russians rising up in the streets of Moscow demanding America does something. I mean, or Iran rising up in the streets. I mean, they can demand Americans stop sanctioning them. So you can rise up and say, you're hurting me. I think that's fair. You can rise up and say, you're using my money to hurt other people. But if it's somebody completely out of that realm, I just don't know exactly what we can do. And so many of us just decide to give our opinions or criticize, but not be as, outwardly really showcasing. So I think that's why on social media, we're seeing a lot of outrage for this particular conflict and for Ukraine than we do other particular conflicts around the world. And if we engage in more, and if we're using our American dollars and our American weapons, then you will see that rising up for those particular conflicts or those particular issues. That's what you're going to see, and I think that's why. All right, guys. I hope you guys have a really great night. Go gorge out on some more Halloween candy that maybe your kids brought home. Have a great night. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. If you have any comments or questions, you can email me, kim@kimiverson.com. Otherwise, guys, we will see you tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, here on Rumble. Have a good night. Oh, that's right. We have to do one more sponsor. Okay. Field of Greens. I got to tell you guys about this before we take off here. So Field of Greens, you guys know I love this stuff. This is a fine powder made from dehydrated whole fruits and vegetables, carefully selected to give you the most nutrients in your diet possible. I love this stuff. You just take a scoop of this, you put it into your ice water. This is the way I prefer it, but I have tried it in soups. I have tried it mixing it into salad dressings. I have baked it into goods, like bread. I haven't tried the brownie thing, but I have tried it in like a kind of like a garlic bread. And it's all good anywhere you do it, but I do prefer just to drink it in ice water because it's actually a good tasting drink. So I don't really need to mask it in a bunch of other ways. But there's a lot of ways that you can use this because it is such a fine powder. But this is a great way to get all of your fruits and vegetables into your diet. So you just head to fieldofgreens.com, you use the promo code Kim, and you will get 15% off your first order. Again, it is fieldofgreens.com, promo code Kim, get 15% off your first order, and get all of your fruits and vegetables into your diet. You can't just live on Halloween candy, guys. You can't. Turns out it's not good for you. So you've got to get your fruits and vegetables. I mean, you could gorge out on Halloween candy all day and not eat all the fruits and vegetables you need, but as long as you're drinking your Field of Greens, then maybe it'll fly, right? All right, guys, that is really it for tonight's show. Thank you for being here. We will be back again tomorrow night. Have a good one. Bye-bye.